For the next two levels, we're going to be looking at managing inventory. So inventory is any idle material or product that you're moving within your organization or that you're moving between parts of your supply chain. So when we talk about inventory, this would include our raw materials as well as our work in process. So why would you hold inventory? Well, we hold inventory because we're waiting for it to be transported to the next part of our supply chain. Right? We hold inventory because we want to make sure that we have enough on hand when we need it. So we want to prevent stock outs. So a customer arrives, is looking for our product. We want to make sure we can meet that demand. So we might hold excess finished product as inventory just in case. We also want to take advantages of the discounts we get from buying in bulk. So we may buy more raw materials than we need and hold on to it so that we can get that discount from buying in bulk. We also want to smooth out any seasonal demand that happens with our production. So we want to make sure that even in the slower times when we're not selling as much product, we can still keep producing, and so that we can have steady production throughout the year instead of having to scramble when there's high demand and then be idle when there's a lack of demand. So we may hold excess inventory, so we start production now in preparation for those high demand periods. We also might want to decouple operations. So we don't want our operations to be so dependent on each other, and so we can separate them by holding excess inventory, and that way we don't have one part of the production process sitting idle, waiting for partially created product to arrive. Instead, it can constantly be working. So it's a way to decrease the dependency in our production process. We also might want to hedge against price increases. So if we're talking about the raw materials that we are purchasing, then we might want to stock up now when we think it's cheap because we think the prices are going up. So there's a number of reasons why we might hold our inventory. So as we look at how we manage our inventory, we need to identify whether we have independent or dependent demand. So independent demand is where demand is fairly stable for your product. And so the methods we're going to use to manage our inventory are different if we have independent demand versus dependent demand. Dependent demand is what you see when you have sub-assemblies. So for example, if we have a company that makes cars, then there are sub-assemblies when it comes to preparing the vehicle. That is, we need to build or buy engines to go in those vehicles. We need tires. The chassis has to be assembled. So we can break down the production of the cars into different components or sub-assemblies. What that means is it means the demand for those sub-assemblies, like the demand for a completed chassis or for tires or for an engine, are dependent on demand for the final product. And so dependent demand is much more lumpy compared to independent demand, which is nice and steady. And that's because those sub-assemblies are dependent on demand for the final product. So we need a bunch of engines to put in the cars as we build the cars. We need a bunch of tires as we build the cars and put the tires on them. So it tends to be lumpy demand. Well, which type of demand you have changes how you manage the inventory and what decisions you need to make. If you have independent demand, the key decisions you need to decide are how much do you order and how often. So when do you order those materials you need to manufacture your product? How much do you order and when do you place those orders? Dependent demand, in that case, we're going to need to determine how much, and how much we're going to need is going to depend on the demand for the final product. So the demand for our sub-assemblies will depend on how much demand there is for the final product. We also need to make decisions about things like safety stock. That is, are we going to produce a bit extra, or are we going to buy a bit extra in terms of our inventory so that we have excess on hand just in case the demand is higher than we expect. Okay. Now, when you have independent demand, you're going to look at different methods like fixed order quantity. So that is every time we place an order for our inventory, we're going to order the same amount every time. Or we have fixed order interval. That is, we're going to place the order at the same time. So the amount we actually order will differ. And then we have what is called single period model for when you have inventory that goes bad. Okay? Now, in comparison, when we have dependent demand, we can have a push system or a pull system. In a push system, a batch of items is made. Okay, in our subassembly, we make the tires, and then we push it to the next work center where it gets added to the vehicle. Or we can have a pull system, and the pull system is where the work center was going to pull, so we go get the tires exactly when we need to add them to the vehicle. So we can push or we can pull. When you have a push system, you're using material requirement planning. And when you're using a pull system, you're using just-in-time delivery and manufacturing methods. So for the next 2 levels, we're going to look at these 5 different types of ways to manage inventory depending on whether you have independent or dependent demand. But for this week, what we're going to focus on is the just-in-time manufacturing system. And since we're going to focus on just-in-time manufacturing system, since it is closely tied with a supply chain. So since we just finished our discussions on supply chain management, let's focus first on just-in-time manufacturing and closed-loop supply chains, and then we'll move into more inventory management.